Morbidly Beautiful Radio. We horror.
Did you hear the one about the man who can't be destroyed? He was buried alive.
What more can you do to a human being? This is inhuman. He's got to be crushed, just under the weight of that much dirt.
He was set on fire.
What the hell is going on? Come on, down! The cat's getting on fire!
They carried him away. But he keeps coming back. Don't be afraid. Be terrified.
As I lay me down to sleep, I pray my soul is mine to keep. My soul can never step outside this bed, never into all the evil. Now back from the dead.
Are you scared?
Be here.
And welcome to another episode of the Calling Hours Horror Podcast on Morbidly Beautiful Radio. Once again, it is I, your head undertaker, the dead man Michael Jones of MorbidlyBeautiful.com, Coffin Cuties Magazine, and Digital Dead Magazine. Well, it's the new year, ladies and gentlemen, and I think we should hit this off on what would be considered a controversial note. Tonight, in our feature interview, we are going to have a couple of people that I consider to be great journalists in our industry. Included in that will be Dave Maresca, a fellow podcaster at the Hollow 9 Network, and you may remember him from a couple of weeks ago as being a guest on the show, and I also was on his show. We're also going to be joined by fellow writer at Morbidly Beautiful, Argalin Darkscares. Argalin was the first guest on the Calling Hours Horror Podcast when it went over to Morbidly Beautiful Radio. And our topic this evening is we are going to be discussing the entire Victor Salva controversy about whether or not he should still be making films, whether Jeepers Creepers 3 was a good idea, bad idea. We're also going to be touching on the controversy with Roman Polanski and other names that are involved in the horror and movie genre as it pertains to all of the controversy with sexual harassment, rape, and all of the horrific stuff that goes on in the film industry. I really find that it's going to be an interesting discussion. It is not going to be an ugly discussion, and what I mean by that is there's not going to be any screaming at one another if there's a disagreement on certain aspects. You know, I'm not looking to put anyone in the dumpster. We're just trying to have an adult conversation about what's going on. On social media, this is a very polarizing topic. You have people that go from one end of the spectrum to the other on this. So I'm really looking forward to my guests coming on and discussing that. And that will take place at 8:30 this evening. In our Digital Dismemberment Spotlights this evening, we will once again have a Scream Factory double feature as we review the Blu-ray releases of The Curse and The Devil's Candy. I found both movies to be interesting to say the least. The Curse stars a young Will Wheaton right after Stand By Me, and I believe right before he started as Wesley Crusher on Star Trek The Next Generation. As far as The Devil's Candy goes, this was a highly entertaining film. I love the soundtrack. There's lots of metal involved. It's got an interesting storyline. So look forward to those coming up in just a few moments. We will also be featuring 3 bands in our Metal Massacre Spotlights this evening, so we're going to get right into that. In our first Metal Massacre Spotlight, the band is Guttural Corpora Cavernosa. The CD is You Should Have Died When I Killed You, and the song is They Would Wiggle and Squirm. You just heard Guttural Corpora Cavernosa. The CD is You Should Have Died When I Killed You, and the song was They Would Wiggle and Squirm. Guttural Corpora Cavernosa is a Taiwanese death metal band from Taipei that was formed in the mid to early 2000s. They are available through Gorehouse Productions. Make sure to visit them at www.facebook.com/Guttural Corpora Cavernosa TW / to find out when and where they will be touring, to pick up their CDs and their merchandise. Coming up in just a few moments, we're going to have our feature interview this evening. Fellow podcaster Dave Maresca and fellow writer Argalin Darkscares. But before that, it's time for some digital dismemberment. And in our first digital dismemberment spotlight this evening, we are covering Scream Factory's Blu-ray release of The Curse, which is part of a double feature including Curse 2, The Bite. Now, I found this to be an interesting little horror film from the 80s. To give you a little bit more info, it was directed by David Keith. The movie stars a young Will Wheaton, Claude Akins, Malcolm Danner, Cooper Huckabee, John Schneider, yes, that John Schneider, Amy Wheaton, the sister of Will Wheaton, Steve Carlisle, Kathleen Jordan Gregory, Hope North, and Steve Davis. Now, just as a little bit of background information on the film, Nathan Crane is a religious man trying to hold on to his farm and keep his family in line. A real estate developer is trying to buy most of the farm property in the area, including Mr. Crane's family farm, in the hope that the Tennessee Valley Authority will choose the town for the site of a new dam and recreational area. The night has a terrible storm, and an unidentified glowing object crashes on the Crane farm, and with it comes a horrible curse for the Crane family and the members of the community. The film was shot in Atlanta, Georgia, budget of about $1.1 million, and it grossed almost $2 million in the U.S. The production company was Transworld Entertainment. Now, just like a lot of 80s films, of course we didn't have too much in the way of CG or anything like that. Not a over-the-top, horrifically gory horror film, though it does have a few moments of interesting makeup. Now, it was really fun to see Will Wheaton. Like I said, this film takes place right after his role in Stand By Me, and I think it was right before, and I mean just right before, he started as a young Wesley Crusher on Star Trek The Next Generation. Now, be forewarned, there will be some spoilers as I discuss the film a little bit here. Will, or Zach as he's known in the film, and his sister and mother are basically living on a farm with Claude Akins, Nathan, and the farm appears to be in financial trouble. It's like it hasn't had a good crop in a while, and there's a local real estate agent who wants to buy up a lot of the local properties in the area with hopes that the Tennessee Valley Authority will put in a dam and recreational facility in the area. You can tell that the family dynamic is a little contentious. Will does not get along with what I'm guessing is Nathan's older son, and there are several moments where you see the disarray between the two of them. Nathan is an extremely religious man and uses a lot of biblical references and quotes during his discipline of young Zach. Now, late one night, his mother has an affair with a farmhand on the property, and as that's happening, there's a horrific thunderstorm that rolls through. At the same time that the storm rolls through, this gigantic, what appears to be a meteorite, crashes onto the farm's land. In shock, everyone wakes up, runs out. The father catches the mother with the other guy. Everyone goes to check out the meteor. And it's this odd, glowing shaped mass that over time slowly starts to melt. Now, on the farm property, they've just built a well, and that's kind of a pivotal moment in the storyline. The viscous fluid that melts from this meteorite finds its way into the water system. And as the film progresses, we see that it affects the taste of the water, it affects the crops, it affects the farm animals in the area. The fruit is rotten. There's like mealworms and maggots and all kinds of bugs growing in the vegetables. The water has a bad taste. The local town doctor sends some of the water samples off to be examined, and later on in the film, when they're examined, you find out that they may include a new element which is basically changing the chemistry and DNA of anyone and anything that ingests it. Now, throughout the film, the family, with the exception of Zach and his younger sister, are drinking the water, eating the food, and they start to develop sores. His mother in particular seems to be mentally affected by what's going on, growing huge nasty boils. Her mental capacity starts to fluctuate. Zach tries to get help from the town doctor, of course, who sends off the water. His family begins to act more and more erratically through the film, to the point that the mother almost seems to be evolving or de-evolving. Skull features change, loss of hair. She becomes much more animalistic, even attacking the father at one point, even grabbing Zach, in a vicious fashion. The father attempts to keep everything in the family. He even gets mad at Zach when he goes to get the doctor after the mother has a particular nasty, violent episode. As the film goes on and on, the farm animals start to show signs of just, it looks like rot and decay, and the crops continue to go bad. The family starts to act stranger and stranger. In order to keep his sister safe, Zach goes into town, is getting fresh water from another source, bringing home food. The mother is eventually locked into a cellar because she becomes so violent, and then the movie just goes completely nuts. The real estate agent shows up with the wife's doctor to try and convince the farmer to sell his property. The woman is mauled by the family dogs, who of course have been transformed, or however you want to call it. They maul her. The real estate agent winds up being murdered by the mother. The doctor finally finds out what's going on, rushes back into town to try and save young Zach, and upon arriving at the farm is murdered by the farmer. The man from the Tennessee Valley Authority, who's been scouting the area, starts to see that there are strange things going on. He shows up at the house to try and rescue young Zach and his sister. Some incredible sequences here. The father winds up getting pitchforked. The house basically starts to fall in on itself. Zach manages to get his younger sister out of the house before everything collapses. And then there's a small, strange twist at the end. I don't want to give that away. If you want to find out the twist, you're going to have to watch it. Overall, it was an enjoyable 80s film. It's not the gore fest that people may hope for. Overall, I'd probably give the movie a 2.5 out of 5 stars. It's not overly horrific. It's not overly terrible. But it's not overly good. It's one of those middle of the road films. It's enjoyable. It's a good popcorn movie. You sit down with your friends, get to see Will Wheaton in a younger role before he became really famous from Star Trek: The Next Generation. The film has a good transfer. It looks good for an 80s film. The soundtrack sounds pretty good. The sound quality is actually quite excellent. Listen to it on a good sound system. You'll pick up all the little nuances in the soundtracks. Not a lot in the way of special features. You have the trailer. It's pretty much it. This is pretty typical for a Scream Factory double feature. It would have been nice to possibly have seen, an interview with Will or some of the other cast. Overall, I give the Blu-ray disc a 7 out of 10. Like I said, it would have been nice to see some other stuff. I like the artwork on the front cover. It quite enjoyable to look at. So it's definitely worth picking up and adding to your collection, especially if you're a Scream Factory fan. So make sure to head on over to www.screamfactory.com to pick up your copy of the Blu-ray release of The Curse, part of a double feature with Curse 2, The Bite. Coming up in just a few moments, we are going to have our feature interview, Dave Maresca and Argalin Darkscares, about the whole Victor Salva controversy and all of the crazy shit that's going on in Hollywood with all of these sexual scandals. But before that, we're going to go into our second Metal Massacre Spotlight. The name of the band is Body Snatch. The CD is Universe of Gory Tales. And the song is Crypt of Gore.
Perishing of the cold, no doubt, no
welcome back. You just heard Body Snatch. The CD was Universe of Gory Tales, and the song was Crypt of Gore. Body Snatch is an American slam death metal band from New York that was formed in 2005. As of this moment, they are unsigned, but you can visit them at www.facebook.com/Bodysnatch to find out when and where they will be touring and to pick up their CDs and merchandise. But now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to go into our feature interview.
And you will face the sea of darkness, and all therein that may be explored.
And welcome to our feature interview this evening. Tonight, I'm going to be joined by Dave Maresca. You guys should remember him from Hollow Nine Networks. A couple weeks ago, I had him on the podcast. And I'm also being joined by Argalin Darkscares, of course, fellow writer at Morbidly Beautiful. If you all should remember as well, he was the first guest when we switched over to Morbidly Beautiful Radio. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thanks for having me on, man.
No problem. You know, this has always been a subject that has been a very sore spot for me. Being a journalist in the genre, this is a topic that you've seen come up recently over the last couple of years, even though Salva's history has been known. And just to reiterate, we are going to be talking about Victor Salva, the controversy about Jeepers Creepers 3, whether or not he should still be making films. But we're also going to talk about other filmmakers like Roman Polanski, who it seems like the general media gives a pass on or makes excuses for. And we'll also touch on some of the other directors, actors, producers, both in the genre and in Hollywood in general, that are a part of what's going on. Now, gentlemen, let's just start out here. You know, we look at what happened with Victor Salva. We know his history. We know what happened with him. We know he went to jail, all of this. Dave, let's start with you. On the subject of Victor Salva, you know, should this guy still be making movies?
Well, I mean, you know, if we want to look at it from a technical perspective, you know, there's the argument that he did pay for his crime. You know, like, I think that's something that's not even just a horror genre, but something that's always been a sort of tropey element of stories is when you have the character who's got the past, that they've been in prison, and when they're confronted by a new situation and the law enforcement immediately suspects them, they give you this, I paid my debt to society. I did what was asked of me to make restitution, you know, and so I think there's definitely some weight that can be put behind that in Victor Salva's case. I mean, part of it too is I try to think to myself, if I hadn't heard about this guy's past before I'd seen the movie, would I have any feelings about watching that movie, the Jeepers Creepers, and think to myself, man, I bet the person who made this has some kind of weird history with homosexual pedophilia and underage sex scandal. I just kind of feel like there's a thing where, are we going to look at this and say we have to judge the art by the personal life of the artist, or can we hold people accountable for their actions and then look at the things that they do that have nothing to do with those actions as separate entities? And I think if you can say he paid his debt, he admitted what he did, he didn't try to flee the country or anything, which I know is a veiled jab at somebody else on the list, but I feel like it's fair. I kind of feel like maybe you can say if he hasn't had any relapses since then, if he's being monitored, and he can still make films and not have them be tainted, with the actual filmmaking experience. No one on the set has anything to report that anything inappropriate was happening. Sure, why not? Why can't he? I mean, we allow people with sexual predatory pasts to move into new neighborhoods. They just have to go and tell everybody that they have a past as a sex offender. So maybe that's something that would be something he has to wear as a scarlet letter a little bit. Everybody who's going to work on this film has to be informed this guy has a past, a felony record for this. So as long as you can, he's been through probation, he's served time, everything's been fine since. We have all these monitored reports from his parole officer. So as long as you're made aware, and you feel comfortable still taking the job, I think there can be some kind of way that he can still operate that way.
Argalin, how about you?
Okay, well, I have a question first.
Sure.
Do you know if he's legally registered? Is he legally allowed to work with minors now?
Okay, yeah, I was going to bring that up after you gave your response, but yes, from what I understand, he served 15 months of a 3-year sentence, and people will argue that that's not fair, but the one thing that I do want to point out, and I think that people forget this when it comes to this conversation, we're talking about his crime took place 30 years ago. So when you look at the crime and the punishment that he received for his crime, you have to look at it under the guidelines of what the laws were 30 years ago. Everyone is looking at this crime as if it happened yesterday. And I'm not saying that should make, that doesn't excuse him or it makes a difference, but the laws were different 30 years ago. He did not accept a plea deal. He got out for good behavior. He did his probation. He has fulfilled his obligation to his probation. There has never been another accusation against him. And when he works on set, if there are underage children on the same film, he is not allowed to be unsupervised with them. And he also has to tell everyone who doesn't know, because it seems like everyone knows now, that he is a sex offender.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, right. I mean, man.
Well, my memory's awful, but I can't remember what came out first, Jeepers Creepers or Powder. And I remember I had some kind of animosity towards Powder. I don't know if
I know why. I'll tell you why.
Well, yeah. Teenage Jeepers Creepers, and now there's this stupid Powder thing. I have a funny feeling I knew about this a long time ago. Like, even when Jeepers Creepers 2 came out, and it was basically Siege on a football team on a bus, basically. That was right?
Yes.
I was like, I feel, this feels weird. There's something weird with this movie. Well, see, I mean that in a humorous way, but in a serious way. Like, I thought, like,
no, I don't mean to laugh. I never, in all the times I've ever talked about Jeepers Creepers 2, was like, oh yeah, football team under siege on a bus. I'm like, yeah, that does have some connotation now that you boil it up that way. I just laugh.
But, absolutely, he has the right to make more movies. And speaking as a fellow artist, I guess, I say I hope he does have new ideas and gets the opportunity to express them. However, we have the right to say, no, we don't want to see that. Makes us feel weird. You make us feel weird. Sorry, that's just the way the human soul and the human mind works. Deal with it. And it's interesting because we're like a community, like the horror movie buffs are the real big fans, and it would probably hurt him. It probably is hurting him tremendously that he's getting all of this negative energy from his people, his crowd, his side of the universe. So in a way, I think all this shit that he's taking is probably a pretty exceptional punishment in and of itself.
Sure.
Because I'm not defending him. I'm just saying he's probably still suffering, if you want to even recognize that. But if I were him, I'd be embarrassed as hell. I wouldn't, I think he should make more movies. Why not?
Now, let me ask you this, and in no way, this is not bashing women. This is not bashing feminism or anything like that. But let me bring an interesting point to this. Do we look at Victor Salva's crime differently because it was against, I mean, of course it was pedophilia, but do we look at his crime differently because he committed it against a male as opposed to a female?
I think whether or not we feel that way on the surface, my personal read on that is I think it plays into the psychology here. I mean, if you look at, if we want to talk about how that's reflected in society, the fact that there's even debate over things like same-sex marriage and same-sex adoption, it's an area that doesn't have a socially polite way of being defined. And I think that's funny because of how much energy is put into arguing about it on both sides. But I feel like that, to me, plays a very big role here, especially, and this is a lot in response to your article, that about, you know, comparing and contrasting the Salva and Polanski situations. It's kind of interesting how hyper-focused we seem to be on Salva while Polanski is still being celebrated. And I think if you're looking at these two sort of cases that are supposed to be the same type of crime, and the only thing different is that it's perpetrated, you know, same sex versus opposite sexes, I feel like that can't really be ignored. Like, if I were a lawyer in court, I'd be saying, well, what is that? You know what I mean? Like, clearly we can see these two things are the same up until this point, and that's where we're seeing a difference, and both of these things are being treated differently. We can't throw out that correlation.
Argalin?
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting how, I don't know, I always get all philosophical with these kind of discussions. Like, does the age of the victim, the sex of the victim, do these things affect the crime itself? Like, all right, I get all graphic and shit. Now, if Victor Salva were to touch a young girl's, you know, parts, you know, does that make it, like, of course, even saying that, you know, hearing it makes us kind of angry, and, oh, that's horrible. But then if we hear Victor Salva touched a little boy's parts, it makes us a different kind of angry. As much as me anyway, I mean, maybe I'm ignorant, I don't know, but it makes me feel a different kind of anger and frustration. But then the legal system tries to keep that in check, and now they should be making sexual assault punishable, you know, equally, no matter the age or the sex.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree with that, absolutely.
So, I guess that maybe carries over into Polanski a little bit. Because I don't know much about his situation. I know he did bad stuff and over a long period of time, correct?
Yes, and I'll bring up Polanski here in a second, but I think what you're both bringing up is, you know, it's an interesting aspect. You know, as I'm a father of, I have a young daughter who was the victim of sexual assault, and, you know, when I wrote that article, a lot of people ripped on me saying that, oh, I don't understand what I'm talking about. I don't know how these victims feel and things like that. And, you know, and I try to make them understand that, you know, I do. Just because I personally have never been the victim of anything like that doesn't mean that I don't know what these victims go through. I know what my daughter had to go through. You know, it's... Go ahead.
The loved ones and the people that care about the victim and the people the victim care about, they're victims too.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting to me too because there's a certain level where I think at least there's some side out there. I definitely do not condone this side at all, but there's a side that tries to argue that the perpetrator is as much a victim in the situation as well because there's this compulsion or something that's kind of, you know, driving this behavior, and so maybe even sometimes they don't want to do it. And I feel like sometimes we hear the same thing from serial killers, and we hear the same thing from other people who, listen, you know, I get it. You know, we all have, you know, I'm sure being a human, having experiences in life, we have positive and negative experiences across all kinds of spectrums. there are some of us that go through some horrible, horrible things, but then they don't turn around and put the same level of intellect and strategy into committing equally atrocious things, and then finding a way to say, well, I'm a victim because of the things I've gone through, and now I don't know why, but I'm compelled to do this. I've always said there's this thing that sort of keeps humans at the top of the species food chain of the planet, and that's this idea that we have communication to a higher level. We articulate a lot more of our feelings and our experiences, but we can think about the act of thinking. We can imagine possible ramifications. We do a lot of living in fake worlds that haven't happened yet. A lot of our thought processes are about what's going to happen if I don't make it to work on time? What's going to happen if I don't eat when I'm hungry? What's going to happen if I, don't get that bill out today? What happens to my house? And all these things start to build these futures that haven't happened yet. And as far as we know, animals on the planet don't do that. And so when we have an ability like that, you can't tell me that there isn't a voice inside your head as you're about to go and molest a child that's not saying, you really shouldn't be doing this. This person you're doing this to has absolutely zero maturity enough to be able to even understand what's happening. And by doing this to them at a developmental time, you're creating a trauma that could affect the rest of their lives. You can't tell me that if you can manipulate, Machiavellianly create a situation to be alone with that person, to create the situation where victimization can happen, that there isn't another voice in there. That's why I don't know if I necessarily agree 100% with sociopath, as a theory. Yeah. I'm like, I kind of feel like if you're that intelligent, though, there has to be a spot in the mind, even if it's buried and very deep and easy to ignore. There has to be something that can tell you there's a scale of right and wrong here, and you're actively hanging out on the dark side of the force. Yeah. Yourself, you're doing it knowingly. Just go ahead, bro. That's kind of what I'm getting from it.
All right, I got two things to sort of say. First of all, I agree 100%. I mean, I am not a victim. I've never been really victimized. I don't have a victim's way of thinking. But so maybe I'm wrong when I say, sort of like, whatever happened to this person, shouldn't they know better? I mean, whether they were violated, assaulted, many times, family members, friends, whoever, however old they were, they lived in this country and listened to the same music, watched the same TV, saw the same movies, read the same books. Shouldn't something have sunk in that behavior like this is not good and it's bad? And I guess not. Either they don't care. I mean, maybe there's some devious thinking going on. Maybe thinking, well, I've got problems too, so that kind of gives me a pass.
Right.
What I want. I don't know. And the other thing is, was Victor Salva ever questioned about his enthusiasm with casting young people in movies? Like, has it ever been suggested that this, preying on young people is actually his career, and he's just sort of using the movies thing as a way to bring people?
I don't. Well, no, that's a good question, and I don't know if that's ever been posed to him. But it's this will tie into a point that I'm going to bring up here a little later. But you can make that argument. I'll just go ahead and bring it up now then, since it ties in with this question. We talk about these types of things, and there's a lot of narrative with films, how women are treated, how, in film, just in general. If you want to make the argument that Salva only does this because his victims are young boys, do people have the right to use the same argument then that use it against Polanski, use it against any male director? Well, because you show women in a sexualized fashion, therefore you must be harboring a hidden desire to rape or mistreat women.
And I think there's something to be. I mean, see, this is a slippery slope, and I'm gonna say something that might be a little controversial here. But what does it say, if there's any truth to that, about the level to which our minds will go to create these complex systems to be able to then deviate at the last minute, and it's all geared towards creating the opportunity to then break your own morality. You know what I mean? I mean, just think about what that says, if that's true. I find it, and that's the reason I find it hard to believe that someone would go to the lengths of learning how to make movies. You know what I mean? But again, not being somebody who understands the mindset of someone who's going into breaking these kind of things. You know, I mean, for all the grandioseness of the statements I made, I have no idea. Maybe the sort of actual definition of a sociopath is someone who doesn't have empathy, who doesn't have that consideration for the fact that there's all this other stuff going on in the world outside of you. You know, in their mind, their experience is the only thing that matters. So in that regard, yeah, I mean, if people are just objects to you, I'm sure you can justify doing these things, but the idea that you would know, create this thing, I mean, maybe there is something that Hollywood has a lot of barriers. You know, it's got gatekeepers, and you're going to have to appease the gatekeepers to get into it, kind of an industry. And in many cases, when somebody's in a position with that kind of power, if they have these inclinations, it's the perfect opportunity to take advantage. You know, and so maybe there is something to this on an industry level, because we've heard so many stories of how so many people in power have been doing this. But I don't know. I mean, I like the movie Jeepers Creepers, 2. I actually liked Powder as well. And I think if you're telling me he only made these movies to create the possible opportunity to maybe have a sexual encounter with young boys, I think, holy shit, dude, you actually got some really good talent to use in a really fucked up way. You know what I mean? And so it's almost like I'm watching these movies not thinking this was only to make sure he was around young boys. But if that turns out to have been true, that would be like a heartbreaking revelation, you know?
Agreed.
I just like asking what ifs. I enjoy asking what ifs and really stretching a topic.
Oh, no, that's awesome. That was great, dude. Because to me, like, as soon as you said it, I got punched in the gut. I was like, whoa, my God. And then it pisses me off because I'm like, shit, you know, I'm just a normal guy trying to learn how to make movies and get into the Hollywood industry. Like, I'm not some sick predator trying to devise a perfect way to always be around potential victims. And that's what gets a career in filmmaking? Like, what the hell am I doing wrong? Being a normal person who doesn't want to hurt other people.
No, and I think it really is a great, valid question, but on the same token, and it's not to discount the thought or, you know, the possibility of that being a thing, but really stop and think about that moment for a moment. You know, you hit it on the head. Think about, I don't know, the ego that you would have to go, I want to molest X gender of person. Let me become a filmmaker so I'm around that type of person all the time.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying? I mean...
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I mean, do you see what I'm saying? I mean, that's ridiculous to almost think about. Well, you know what? I like being around supermodels all the time, so I'm going to become a hotshot fashion photographer so I have the chance to rape or molest models. You know what I'm saying?
I'll tell you what, man. I have a lot of friends who are models on Facebook. I'm sorry, just before we move too far away from that. And that is a very real danger. That is a huge thing. As I see constantly in that community. You know, and anybody who's friends with some really awesome people out there, Kathleen Sanchez, Whitney Benson, Sam Fallenbaum, all these people out there who are kind of doing the freelance model thing, Rihanna Nova, they all have an internal network of do not work with this guy. You know,
right.
They have I had this situation. All of them are very professional. Everyone, you know, a professional model has rules. You know, what they will and won't do, what they are and are not comfortable with. And as soon as anybody even begins to violate that, you know, if they have a bad feeling just from a private message conversation on Facebook, they screenshot, they post, and they put together a list of a do not work, a danger zone list. And so it's interesting that we brought that up in this conversation, and I go, well, hold on a second, because that actually is a thing that happens in the photography world. So maybe this isn't so outside the realm of possibility for the film world.
Well, and it's not to discount. It's not to discount what you're saying, you know, but to me, there's a big difference between someone who takes pictures of someone and someone who is actually given money to go out and make a feature film. That's the point that I'm making.
And well, yeah, photography is a little bit easier to do this with than making major Hollywood films. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's all it is. I'm not discounting that it does not happen. That's not what I was. I don't want anyone to take that away from what I was saying.
Well, I feel the need to apologize. I feel the need to apologize to Victor Salva, kind of. Geez. It's just sort of a what if. And the thing is, after I said that, I kind of even deconstructed the idea further and said, well, maybe he is a good filmmaker. Somewhere along the lines, maybe making shorts, maybe making Jeepers Creepers or Powder, whatever he did first, maybe it sort of occurred to him, hey, this is a great way for me to take care of this urge I have. So I'm going to start maybe playing it. And I don't know. See, that's what I mean.
It's a fascinating question. And if I ever had the opportunity to interview Salva, it's a question I would ask him.
I mean, I think you could easily...
No, I've never had the opportunity to interview him. I don't think he does media interviews.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Well, that there shows you that he's upset about something.
Yeah, I can't imagine it, I mean, it's like you sort of think of like an embarrassing part you took in a movie, and you're like, man, I'm always going to be known as Urkel or something like that. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's hard enough to live with. And it's like, man, I'm always going to be known as the guy who filmed himself getting off with a little kid on set for a movie. Like, oh, man, that's going to be a rough one to have to deal with every day. I can understand the going into hiding. At least, I'm sorry, media, I just can't do this anymore. Because here it is. I mean, none of us know the guy, and we're having a really deep conversation about what the implications of his actions are. And now that's something that's a little bit invited, I will say, because he's a Hollywood filmmaker. I mean, there's a certain level of, I think even courts have ruled a lot of times that celebrities, by the nature of their profession, have to accept a certain loss of privacy. Like, this is why, they can't ban the public from going to shopping malls so that they can shop. They have to deal with the fact that, you live in the world, you decide to make yourself a household name. So this is kind of par for the course. But, at the same time, we can't deny that he's a human being. So to have to face this every day in the mirror, and then walk out your door and have to face it every day from strangers who might not even be related to the victim. You know what I mean? Like, how did this get so far outside of the circle of your personal life? Well, your personal life is public knowledge, my friend. I'm sorry, it's your job. And
sure.
So that, again, sometimes brings up even in my mind, do I really want to get into filmmaking? Like, how successful do I actually want to be? Because, those are the kind of things where you're like, oh, a mistake I made in college is suddenly coming back to haunt me. And hopefully the mistakes aren't that you raped somebody, but, maybe you cheated on an exam, and now people are using that to taint your character. There's, all kinds of things that this world has changed to make more important than maybe they used to be, or at least more known and talked about.
I've discussed this topic with my mother, and we kind of got to the theory / idea that this whole Me Too thing, we all support. It's wonderful, but what if it backfires? And everybody, especially males, are afraid to approach attractive women, are afraid to say, you look really cool, I've been watching you at the bar, you look like a very animated, colorful person, be in my movie. I mean, if I said that to someone a decade ago, if they thought it was a pickup line, they would have thrown their drink in my face. Oh, get out of here. But now, I mean, they could probably mold that statement that I said to them into a crime of some kind. And
I think I actually saw an article about that now that you mentioned it.
It's possible that this is going to backfire, and attractive women are going to be unintentionally, I don't know, maybe not punished, but marginalized, avoided, because nobody wants the trouble that Harvey Weinstein and Victor Salva have had to endure.
No, and that's a valid point.
Like I'm on their side, but I'm not.
This is why it would have been really awesome to have a female on this.
I know. I hate that Rebecca couldn't make it, but you're right. That's why I wanted to have a female perspective on the show for this, and hopefully we'll have Rebecca on at another time, and we can bring this up. Now I want to.
I think. I'm sorry. Just before we move too far, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that one of the hardest parts about this situation or even talking about this is that there actually is validity on a lot of sides. This isn't the kind of thing where we're talking about many, good people on many sides of a very horrible situation. There's, everybody's interactions with each other, whether it's of a professional nature or a romantic nature, there's a lot. We're still all people, and so there's a fallibility there, and to be able to say now that you're going to paint everybody's behavior with this brush, that there is no such thing as innocently approaching somebody because you actually find them attractive, that used to just be a risk of rejection. If it's now a risk of being, crucified or prosecuted, that is taking things to a level that I think even the people who are just looking for equality and acknowledgement of, suffrage probably would agree is too far.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of why this is a hard conversation. It's like we have to acknowledge these things, but then we also have to acknowledge, but there is a reason that it would be thought of. I think it's hard to deny that the Me Too thing showed a lot of people have endured in silence things that probably we all agree they shouldn't have had to. And that's on both sides. There were plenty of guys who had Me Too stories. I know I got my fucking bartender I worked with grabbed my ass once, and I was like right out of college, had no idea what to do, and I was just like, all right, well, I guess it was a cute chick who grabbed my ass. I'll just let that go. But there are people who would hear that and be like, dude, you should have called the cops. You should have. It's like, well, no. In 2003, we weren't doing that. You know what I mean? And for me, I look back and I go, man, I should have probably followed up on that. She probably wanted to go out. You know what I mean? Like, damn, I missed an opportunity. But I can make that call. I can't make that call for somebody else. And no one can make that call for me. So it's an interesting conversation,
It's just a possible, after effect, a possible outcome. Because, we're lucky that we're around for this. This is huge. This is like, oh boy, I shouldn't say this, but hey, fuck censorship, right? This is like 9/11 huge. Not as far as death and importance go, but as far as effect on history, effect on the way people act. You can't tell me you haven't acted different since 9/11. And, since this whole Me Too thing started, women, I see it everywhere, which is great. I see it. Women are being treated just a little nicer. They're being heard a little more. When they say something, they're being listened to a little bit. The Facebook has exploded. With both good things and bad things and helpful things and melodramatic things, everything. So I'm kind of glad. I feel kind of privileged, honored that I'm around to see the changes, because there is going to be huge changes, and there's going to continue to be for years and years and years. I think about this shit. I think constantly, and I'm thinking, wow, what if this turns into like censorship? And we're no longer allowed to make R-rated movies, or we're not allowed to we're not allowed to show sex scenes. We're not allowed to show nudity anymore. When is it going to stop? So I don't know.
No, you guys are both right, and we'll talk about the social media aspect of all this in a second. But I want to tie this into Roman Polanski, and just for everyone's sake, listening audience and everything, I'm going to give the details of what Salva was convicted for and what happened with Polanski. So, for those of you that are a little sensitive to this issue, just be forewarned, you're going to hear some pretty nasty stuff here. So, as it pertains...
Uncomfortable spoiler alert.
Yeah. So,
by the way,
in 1988, Salva was convicted of sexual misconduct with one of Clown House's underage stars, at that time a 12-year-old boy.
Clown House?
Clown House was the movie where it happened.
Oh my God, that's horrible. Just hearing that is...
you're like, I'm burning that DVD now.
Right? So, included was videotaping one of the encounters. Commercial videotapes and magazines containing child pornography were also found at his house. Salva pled guilty to lewd and lascivious conduct, oral sex with a person under 14, and procuring a child for pornography. He was sentenced to 3 years in state prison, of which he served 15 months. He completed his parole in 1992. Now, that's all a matter of public record. Now, Roman Polanski. In March 1977, film director Roman Polanski was arrested and charged in Los Angeles with 5 offenses against Samantha Gailey, a 13-year-old girl. Those charges included rape by use of drugs, perversion, sodomy, lewd and lascivious acts upon a child under 14, and furnishing a controlled substance to a minor. At his arraignment, Polanski pled not guilty to all charges, but later accepted a plea bargain whose terms included dismissal of the 5 initial charges in exchange for a guilty plea to the lesser charge of engaging in unlawful sexual intercourse. Polanski underwent a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation, and a report was submitted to the court recommending probation. However, upon learning that he was likely to face imprisonment and deportation, Polanski fled to France in February 1978, hours before he was to be formally sentenced. Since then, Polanski has mostly lived in France and has avoided visiting countries likely to extradite him to the United States. So,
Okay.
right.
Now, is this just,
Go ahead.
is this just the thing he was convicted of, or is there word that he's been doing it, was doing it before that? Or?
Okay, now this is where it gets interesting. There are several documentaries and stuff about Polanski and what went on with him. Just to give you a little bit more detail on the Polanski thing. Polanski pled not guilty to all charges, but accepted the plea bargain deal. Under the terms of the plea agreement, he was ordered to report to a state prison for a 90-day psychiatric evaluation, but the judge granted a stay to allow him to complete his current film project. Under the terms set by the court, he traveled to Europe to complete filming. He came back for his evaluation period, went in for 42 days, and was released. Now, there has been speculation, and several of the documentaries talk about this. In particular, one called Roman Polanski, Wanted and Desired, that there are pictures of him at parties and events doing strange things with young women while he was preparing for his film. Also, in the last year, there have been, I believe, 4 or 5 more young or women who have come out and said that while they were underage back in the days, Polanski did things with them as well.
Just a funny anecdote. I recently graduated from college. My last semester was actually a gender roles in horror movies class, and one of the movies we watched was Repulsion. And I brought it up. I said, well, just as a comment, just like, well, you know, what do you think of all this, the situation with Polanski? And it was just like totally dismissed. She was just like, oh, that's for another class to discuss. We're not discussing it here.
Well, you know, that's an interesting aspect, because that's what we're going to talk about. Now, when I wrote this article about the Polanski situation, you know, I got a lot of responses back from all kinds of different people, including people who are, you know, journalists in our genre. And this is going to give you an idea. These are some of the responses I got when people would scream "Salva, Salva, Salva," and I would be like, "What about Roman Polanski?" These are the responses I got from people. The first one saying, "But what about Polanski, Allen, etc. is kind of like shouting all lives matter. Of course they do, but right now we are focusing on the problem at hand," meaning focusing on Salva and not Polanski. You know, here was the thing. At the time that I wrote that article, you know, I said he is a problem at hand. At that time, he was getting ready to star in Domenico A. Gallero's upcoming thriller, The Stalking Moon, which means he is a pedophile currently working on a film production. This one came from an actual journalist that you and I probably both know, Argalin. I'm not going to say his name on my podcast, but this is what he said to me. He said, "I'll tell you why I'm not bitching about Polanski. Because he is probably going to be shooting in Helsinki or some far-off land, and he's not working in my genre. This motherfucker Salva is now in my neck of the woods as we speak. My fiance works on sets. I have a 2-year-old son. It's a little more close to home.
Okay, can I jump in on that one, making that person sound like a fucking sociopath? Okay, no
Certainly.
offense out there, but at the same time, that's that typical, I don't give a shit until it hits me. So, like, fuck else. They can have the sexual predator running around. He's in my, this guy's around my kid. I'm like, well, do you hear how that is part of this complete non-acknowledgement of other people of society, of this being about more than just you? So you would compromise a moral perspective to only put it through the lens of, I only give a shit if it touches me or my family. That, to me, is part of where when I see a comment like that, I kind of immediately am like, this doesn't really count. Your thought process is completely invalid because it's like so closed-minded and ignorant. I get the fear factor, but I'd really wish you'd open your eyes to what you're actually saying with a statement like that.
I said a terrible thing the last time I was on Calling Hours. We were talking about Weinstein, and I said, well, Weinstein apparently also assaulted Asia Argento. Now it's personal. Just as a part joke, but I don't know, man. I mean,
funny. I'm probably horrible for laughing at it, but I mean, it's
No, and I get it, and it's kind of sad, that I saw another journalist in our genre say something like that, and there was one more, and this was not from a journalist, but this was another one that really got to me, and this person said, I think Polanski and Allen, they're talking about Woody Allen here, are both brilliant.
okay.
Peck, not at all. But are talented people exempt from the laws, both legal and moral? Hell no. I cannot explain the difference I personally feel between Polanski and Allen versus Salva. It doesn't make sense to me, and I don't understand why I'm more willing to accept Polanski's situation. His wife and child were just brutally murdered. Consensual sex with younger girls was more acceptable in the 70s. He only did it once. Yada, yada, yada are all very weak arguments. Yet I'm still less disgusted with him than I am with Salva. Maybe I see a difference between Salva being an actual serial predator who was caught with tons of child pornography in addition to deliberately and consciously manipulating that boy over a long period of time, and Polanski just making a huge error in judgment. Allen fell in love with his wife's 20-year-old daughter, who returned his feelings and later married him. So although I do consider him creepy, I don't consider him a rapist. Should any or all of them be blackballed from working again? Polanski and Allen? I don't think so. Salva? Yeah. Definitely, because his behavior was calculated and heinous. It's just a tough argument, isn't it?
Oh my God, I want to punch that person in the face.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we have our emotions. We're all gonna. I mean, have sort of, well, I'm more offended about this person's actions than that person's. But you got to turn on the common sense. You got to turn on the brain. Yeah. Yes, but they're all terrible. They all deserve to be punished in the best way, proper way possible. You can't say, well, let's excuse Polanski because his movies are better and I like them better. That's you got to separate from that.
It's terrible, and to me that's. And I was going to say this, but then I realized it doesn't work. I was going to say, I mean, is murder? If you kill somebody, you kill somebody. Now, on the surface, that's yes, but then there's like, well, was it vehicular manslaughter? Was it unintentional? Was it premeditated? There's a certain level, though, where a life was lost, so we have to put it in the murder category. You can't just say, these two guys did exactly the same thing, but for some reason this one bothers me and this one doesn't, if you're not going to go the next step and say, well, what was the only thing different between the two? We alluded to this earlier, and that's where someone will put out a rant as long as one of mine, you know what I mean? Saying the whole thing and then finally land on, but it's a tough argument, isn't it? Like, well, only if you're going to be closed-minded and ignorant, man. If you're going to stand there and want us to respect you're coming from an intelligent perspective, but you are closing off the common sense meter right away, it kind of like devalues your entire stance, your entire position.
Well, that wasn't my point. Was just that in these kind of situations, murder, assault or whatever, we shouldn't use our personal opinions or our personal tastes in movies, as an influence.
Right, but I think somebody who puts that comment that we just heard is kind of using that. They might not even realize it could be subconscious that they're using that, but they are doing that, making excuses for one and not making excuses for the other, and not even acknowledging that they're doing that by saying, "Oh yeah, for some reason it's slightly different. I just feel different about this one than that one." You're sort of like you're awaiting for someone else to say, like, "Oh well, because you like Roman Polanski's movies better." Yeah, maybe that's it. It's like they're kind of playing the safe card while also still trying to say, "Yeah, clearly this one's grosser, right?" I mean, I don't have to say why, right? You see it, right? You see it. It's like that weird. Yeah. I assume we're on the same page kind of thing when some of us aren't. Just like, no, I want you to say why it bothers you. I want you to acknowledge it, because that's the only way we're going to have a discussion like this matter anyway, is if everybody's putting their cards on the table and being honest about what they feel and think.
Now, I'm going to throw this out there, and I'm pretty sure I know what both of your answers are going to be, but I just feel like we need to get this out here just to say it. Should it make a difference that Salva is a B-grade horror movie director and Roman Polanski is an Academy Award-winning director and makes high art films? Should his crimes count any less than what Salva's do?
Well, I don't think so, simply because, that was my last point, that we shouldn't be judging these people based on the quality of their art or our personal opinions of them.
Right. And I think there's been enough evidence to suggest that all the members of the Academy are part of a community where this is sort of a widespread, sort of protected and, known about behavior, right? So it's kind of like, if the award is coming from, if the award came from NAMBLA, we'd immediately be like, oh, well, that award doesn't matter, but
right.
The award's coming from the Academy, and they've awarded several people who behaved in the same way, and some of the people who are voting for these awards have recently been not only accused, but have admitted to them, and, have maybe lost their status as Hollywood power players. So it kind of calls into question, even if you were going to use accolades to excuse this, well, what about the place giving the accolades having just as much tarnishment upon its reputation? At that point, it becomes less and less. We're starting to dilute things. It's water. It has less weight than the fact that they did this. It's documented. What do we do about it?
Okay, I have a question.
Sure.
I'm going to use a whataboutism. I love John Oliver. Okay. What do you guys think of Kevin Spacey? Now, what I'm asking about specifically is the reaction. For some reason, his artistic contributions were affected. They literally digitally removed him from a movie and reshot his part with Christopher Plummer. And now Christopher Plummer, for that role, is nominated for awards left and right. Now, I wouldn't even. What do you think of that? Now, there's some that suggest that it's all sort of a smokescreen, like a message that Hollywood, like a Hollywood apology. Like, we're going to give Christopher Plummer this, and we're going to award him for being the hero that rides in on the white horse to save us from the dirty men. Wonderful. But I don't know. What do you guys think of that? And they canceled House of Cards.
Right.
And I read another article somewhere about American Beauty being soiled forever because now he's known for this, and I don't know.
Well, his character was supposed to be so wholesome in that movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah, really.
I think, especially with House of Cards too. I think part of that response, and now this is going to be just me speculating. I don't work on a show. I should have probably given a disclaimer at the beginning of this whole show that anything I'm saying as part of this program is my own opinion and doesn't reflect the opinions of my network or any of the people that I associate with, or my colleagues, or my friends, or my family. But I think with House of Cards, a lot of the details that were starting to come out were that not only was this happening on a pretty regular basis, but that the production itself was aware of it, and that there were actually a lot of steps being taken to keep it quiet. And once it finally broke to the public, I feel like that was probably like a PR maneuver of, well, we're just going to cancel the show, so that they at least have some cover that they, once it was known, we did something about it. That doesn't excuse the fact that if the allegations that has been going on for a long time and was being covered up, that doesn't excuse them in that fact. I think version of the sort of macro effect that this has not only been happening with House of Cards, but every person that Harvey Weinstein met with, and other directors. So it's sort of like becoming, do we just shut the whole machine down? Should the movies that were made that were celebrated while all this was going on, should they be, pulled back and thrown in the garbage? I mean, and in some of those cases, look, the toothpaste is out of the tube. You know what I mean? Like, you can't put it back in. And the fact is, whether these other things were happening outside of during the project itself was created and was released, and people watched it, and people loved them. So you can't go back and make history have not happened. It's an interesting thing where is that somehow a Band-Aid that makes this whole situation feel better? I don't know if it does. With Kevin Spacey, I think maybe, especially we're talking about the Ridley Scott, All the Money in the World refilming here. I feel like that was one. Ridley Scott originally wanted Christopher Plummer. These are all stories that I've heard through friends and college. Okay. So I don't know how valid they are. I don't know how much they've been publicized. But what I had heard was that he originally wanted Plummer, and they pressured him to use Spacey because Spacey's street cred, his acting credibility was a lot, better, or higher because of House of Cards. And for him to then have this to use as leverage to say, fuck this, I don't want my movie to now be the first one that came out after these allegations. There's no way people would be able to separate. And as much as we're arguing about whether or not people should be able to separate these two things, we know by and large the public doesn't, So that's something I think we have to acknowledge in the conversation. And so for Ridley Scott, he, especially with having questionable entries into his Alien franchise recently, he needs a win. And he probably, this was like a passion project for him. And he originally wanted a different actor. They pressured him to take this guy who now has negative heat on him. That's a perfect time for me to be like, I'm Ridley Scott. I made Blade Runner. I made Alien, and I want Christopher Plummer. We're doing this. And so, I think this is certainly what we're... Well, you would think, but some of these stories make it almost sound like even people like Ridley Scott still have to jump through hoops, right? So, I don't know.
The interesting
business.
The interesting aspect to me is, with Plummer taking the role, removing, Spacey, people are going to do what they want to do. But what it brings up is the overall more interesting point. If we decide to go back and look through history and dig all the skeletons out of everyone's closet, how much of history will really exist? Like, if I recall correctly, didn't George Washington and Thomas Jefferson own slaves? So do we erase them from history, even though they're our founding fathers for this country because they own slaves? Let's look back.
There are some that want them to be erased from history.
No, and I know that, but the point I'm trying to make is that how much of history are we willing to erase to get rid of these things? What people seem to forget is if you forget your past, you're doomed to repeat it.
Yeah.
These things,
and in fact,
these things should be shining examples of, can people be talented? Yes. Can they be great artists? Yes. But it also shows that they're human. They do bad things. They're just like the rest of us. They put their pants on one leg at a time. Doesn't matter if they're an Academy Award winner. It doesn't matter if they make great movies, if they make bad movies, if they make music, if they make art. Whatever, it's hard because the ultimate question comes down to is, can you separate the artist from the art? I was speaking with another young lady who has pretty strong views on this, and unfortunately she couldn't make it on as a guest, and it was not Rebecca, it was another young lady. But, she was like, now I can't watch my copy of Reservoir Dogs because Harvey Weinstein was a part, he was the producer. Are we all just going to throw away our movie? Are we going to turn into Fahrenheit 451 because of all of this? And my answer should be no. I hate all of these things that happened. Do I feel bad for all of the victims? Yes. I'm not going to throw away my copy of Reservoir Dogs because of this. I'm not gonna throw away my copy of Jeepers Creepers because of this. There are so many people that are lauded as great people in history for their art who we have found out 50, 60, 70, 100 years, 200 years later did bad things. Can any of us look at ourselves, with anything? I'm not talking about just rape or sexual assault. Can we all honestly look at ourselves and go, we've never, ever done anything that anyone else would find offensive?
Oh, I mean, each one of us have had that worst day that you would absolutely never want to be judged on. You know what I mean? Like, if that was the one day you ever met me and it was my worst day, I was at my absolute worst, like, of course, that will change the way you see me forever. Whether or not every other day before and after that I'm completely different. And I think there's something about that we all overlook when we're doing it to other people. You know what I mean? When we're judging other people. Now, does that worst day excuse that the worst day might have been the day they sexually assaulted a child or had inappropriate sexual contact with an underage person? Absolutely not. There's a whole range of scale for the worst day.
Sure, and I agree with you on that.
You know, but at the same time, we have to look at some other phenomenons here. Like, we already do that separating the behavior from the artist thing. I mean, how many musicians throughout history that we've all just celebrated and loved, and they were like horrid drug addicts who were like, squandered every dollar they made feeding their addiction, or were notorious for abusing their female companions or even, male companions, whatever, their significant others. There are so many artists that we find it a lot easier, I think, in certain industries, like music, for one, in my mind, gets so much more of a pass than this. And the other thing, too, is that why does the fact that he's a horror movie, what does the genre of their work make it easier to kind of feel worse about this person's behavior than another? It's kind of like everybody's lives have elements of horror in them, and elements of romance in them, and elements of happiness and sadness and elation and depression. So, to act like any one genre is this like really horrible side of humanity that should not be explored, well then why are we exploring all these others? Going back and looking through history and trying to now say I'm never going to watch my Reservoir Dogs again is like, you can't make the fact that you spent years watching that movie not have happened. I can't make the fact that some of the lines of dialogue from that movie naturally come out in conversation for me because I thought it was so cool, and the story, which when I'm watching the movie, I'm not sitting there thinking, man, this guy Tarantino, like, I wonder what his life is like, and I hope he treated all the people in his life really well because this dialogue is fucking amazing. It's like, no, dude, this movie's washing over me, and I'm in the moment, and that guy said this cool thing, and I'm going to use that every time somebody gets in my face. So, we have to look at the way our minds, the mechanics of how we ingest this stuff works. And I think it's easier for us to watch something by ourselves and have all the opinions in the world about it. But once you're talking about it with other people, there's this other thing where we have to feel like, are we conforming to the right side of this argument? How are we feeling comfortable in our society right now? What's the tone of the room? What's everybody else feeling on this? I don't want to be the outsider. And I think we all have to remember that you always are the outsider. Everybody's experience in this world is unique to them. So you have to be honest, and that's the biggest part here with all of this, is the honesty. So going back and throwing out your DVDs, does that erase the past 20 years where that movie existed and was totally fine in your collection? If it does, that probably is a rough life for you, because that means you never put a stake in the ground. You never build on your past experiences. You're always trying to revise, and that does nothing. It makes everything not matter.
What do you think, Argalin?
Wow, I'm impressed. You're right. You pretty much said everything. You're 100% right. I definitely agree. Well, like I said, I put this. I watched so many movies. I don't even remember what the Dimension movie was. Something that I was thinking. Don't you love when you have a big movie collection and you're thinking about a movie and you're like, that scene in that movie was pretty neat. Oh wow, I have that. And you want
I feel like watching that right now. Yeah. I love it.
But
now,
the minute the Dimension title card came on, I even said it out loud. I was like, yeah, Dimension. And then I thought, well, that's really, I mean, do I give a shit? Like should that bother me? And anyway, Weinstein didn't make these. He just paid for them, right?
Right.
I'm not excusing him, but I'm just saying, to call his stuff, like the stuff connected to him, soiled art, probably. I don't buy. I'm not into that. I don't agree with that. I'm kind of afraid, actually, somebody's going to come out eventually and accuse Tarantino of a few things, just because...
Well, I mean, he already is kind of in the doghouse for having known about the Weinstein thing for so long and not saying anything about it. You know, and he even tried to play it safe and say, I'm not going to comment right now. There's a lot going on. I want to, like, let this digest before I make my comments. It's like, dude, this is
it's like
exactly the same as not denouncing Nazis, man. You got to think about what that does. You know, what your stalling does. You know, some of these things we all feel like should be less gray and a little bit more black and white to be able to say, I support that or I totally don't support that. You know, and with
that's what I was. Another thing that what you were saying was made me think of. We got to drag in political correctness at least a little bit. Like there have been many times, again at college, in the last 2 semesters, there are jokes that I thought of. There are just even academic jokes that I was afraid to say because of the new climate, the new social, sexual climate, in the world. They're in the country anyway. And just having to watch everything we say. I mean, no, I'm not going to drag politics. Fucking example.
I did this, man. It was a trap I set.
Yes, I'm probably doing the same thing. Trump. Like, people like him. Some people do. And they're very aggressive about it.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, a lot of times, like a lot of Trump supporters express the fear of saying they like him in certain companies. It shouldn't be. And it's just, the same thing goes elsewhere. Like if you're at a rodeo and you like Hillary Clinton, you're afraid to say you like Hillary Clinton. What? That's just shouldn't be. There's so many things that are just like morally and intellectually wrong and shouldn't be, but yet they're happening, and these things are what they are. And I mean, we should know better. We should know enough not to touch children. We should know enough not to hide who we are because we're afraid we're going to make somebody mad. But no.
Well, the last point I want to bring up on this, and it ties into what you just said, Argalin. We talk about politics here, and you brought up Trump. Now, whether you like Trump, whether you hate Trump, whatever, to me that's not really the main point of this. But again, this young lady that I was talking with, one of the points that she brought up, because I had brought up to her, you take someone like Meryl Streep, okay, she doesn't like Trump. She's made a lot of statements about Trump, not liking him. The whole grab him by the pussy statement he made, all of this. Yet, she was one of the people who stood up and applauded for and fought for Roman Polanski. Okay? So you have that double standard there, about that. And the thing...
Make her look like a total asshole, but I mean, she's one of our most treasured actresses.
Well, I don't know who you're asking that to. I disagree, but anyway.
That idea of treasured actresses, like America's treasure. I'm like, I've been in America for 37 years. I've never felt like she's part of my collection of treasures, guys.
But whenever a Meryl Streep movie comes out, everyone's like, "Oh, Meryl Streep, it must be great."
Yeah,
right.
I don't see it. I'm not a big, huge Meryl Streep fan, but not because of her political speaking, just because I look at her and I go, I don't want to look at you anymore.
Right.
That's just me. That's my personal response, and I take responsibility for it. You can call me ignorant if you want. Everybody, you can't deny that as humans, we have a thing where if you look at something and you find it pretty, you want to keep looking at it. You look at something and you don't find it pretty, you don't want to keep looking at it. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that's where the idea of political correctness gets twisted, because people start to think like, oh, well, if I say this, everybody has to agree with it. Like, no, that's not being politically correct. You can actually disagree with people and be polite about it. And so that's kind of where
is this being the closing argument? This is the question that I had. She brought up, because when I brought up the Meryl Streep thing, she goes, it's not so much Hollywood that's calling out the hypocrisy, which is really what this is all about. And this will tie up the Salva and Polanski thing right here. I think this is a good way to finalize the podcast. She said, ultimately what it is it's in the hands of the fans. Because I brought up the point that, You have fan petitions that were trying to get Jeepers Creepers 3 from being made. You had people outside protesting at the theaters when the film got its limited engagements. And my real question is this. This is what we'll end on. Why is it everyone was so willing to crucify and go after the B-grade director in Victor Salva, but these same fans that are calling for his blood are quiet that Polanski's working on a new film, that there are new accusations against Roman Polanski, that he's celebrated as a great artist? Why does the fan base who wants one to never work again never say anything about the other one?
Well, okay, could I throw in my probably
Sure.
actual yet very unpopular opinion here?
Go for it.
The thinking is probably, first of all, Salva is an easier target. Second of all, although once again we've discussed this, it shouldn't be an exception, but Polanski has been around longer and has made, I don't know if you want to say better movies, but some people think they're better. A lot of people do. He's made more of them. And I think those are just two of the basic excuses that I don't think people would give you, but that's the truth.
Yeah.
Because technically, I don't know. That's it. It's because Salva is an easier target, and also in the grand scheme of things, if you were intellectually artistically removed from the Hollywood scene, we wouldn't miss him as much as some might miss Roman Polanski. I don't know. I don't like Roman Polanski's movies either. Honestly, they bore me to hell.
I mean, I think I agree with a lot of it. I think what part of what gets swept up there, and I think what makes him an easier target, is the fact that his crime was against a young boy, versus Polanski's crime, which was against young girls. I mean, even some of the comments that Michael read to us earlier, that going after young girls was a more accepted thing when Polanski did it. It's like, okay, it was more accepted. That doesn't make it right. You know what I mean? And this whole, why is the argument for a parent to their toddler always, if all your friends jumped off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge too? So why can't we apply that mentality to, okay, so because everybody's raping people, suddenly it's all right for you too? So everybody's going after kids, so you might as well jump in the pool? No. That's a total obfuscation of personal responsibility, and it seems to have been a society-wide thing. And I think now we're a lot more sensitive to it now.
Unfortunately for girls, there's that whole, oh, well, she was 16, she was 17, she was 18, she looked old enough, she knew what she was doing, she wasn't a virgin.
Okay,
they throw excuses like that at you.
Yeah, she already did this a bunch of other times. Well, okay, all those guys are guilty too. You know what I mean? Just because two of the three other guys were there before you doesn't make you now not guilty. Yeah, okay, I stabbed her sixth. I had the same knife the other five other guys did, and it's just that the body was left behind when I was done with it. Like, no, dude, you fucking murdered her. You know what I mean? So it's, to me, this weird. And again, it's the same thing. It's easier to throw that kind of like, I'm holding you responsible to something I wouldn't even hold myself responsible to. For, the same industry that protects Polanski to be allowing Salva to be crucified like this speaks volumes. And I think it's a lot easier to call a spade when we have the fact that our entire nation has to debate over whether gay people should be allowed to get married. Right there, alone, on its own, shows you that the fact of couples being made of same sex is something that across the board society doesn't seem to be mature enough to handle yet. Now, there's enough people that do that we actually had some legal traction happen for those people, and now a percentage of the population is allowed to actually enjoy the same rights and privileges that the rest of the population can. But I think the fact that it was a debate, the fact that we had to pretend that anybody that has that as an aspect of their life has to be considered different, almost on a species level, is psychotic. But it is a society-wide illness. It's a maturity that we haven't reached. And so this is a symptom of that, and I think to ignore that is part of what's allowing this conversation to even happen. The fact that society hasn't been ready to look at that and take responsibility for it is why we're even seeing people still treating these two things differently. And it does tie, like, earlier, it ties into the way we look at politics. It ties into the way we look at everything and how people are feeling like this freedom to say what you think and what you feel is also protecting that statement, and that other people have to agree with it, and they don't. You know what I mean? And that's part of why we haven't been able to talk about this until now. And it was one of the things, Michael, that I was really happy about the way you actually were recruiting people to be on the panel for this. You said, I want to have a very professional discussion. I want this to be a thought-out debate. I don't want this to be a screaming match. I don't want it to be an agenda thing. And I think that was a huge example of trying to approach this topic in a responsible way. And I wish that more people would take a cue from that. So I think that's something that I would definitely want to make sure we acknowledge in the course of here as we're wrapping up, that the whole way that this conversation was structured was to be able to kind of do this deep diving and scratch below the surface and start, exposing some of these concepts. Hell, we could get a lot of hate mail for this for all I know, you know what I mean? Hollow 9 could take a huge hit because people don't like what I'm saying, and that's why I want to make sure that I'm distancing myself. Like, this is what I think. I may have a network that I usually make these appearances to promote, but we owe society an honest conversation about it. And I think by, Michael, by you having this set up this way was a great example of how to do that responsibly. I hope more people do it after you, and thank you for pulling this together, man.
No, I appreciate it, and I want to say thank you to both of you for sticking to that guideline. I know it's a very hot topic issue, and we could go on for another 2 hours talking about this. Unfortunately, with time constraints, we can't. But it's sad. We may not have the same politics. We may not believe the same things. All of these things. But at the end of the day, there's still nothing wrong with us sitting down, having a civilized discussion about this, not calling each other names, not cursing one another. It's...
we're on the same team here anyway,
I mean, it's just amazing to me how people just can't have a civil conversation about an uncivil matter.
Yeah. I think there's a tendency for artists to be able to empathize a little bit more with the world around us. It's part of the reason why we actually want to create art. And, in a sort of, I don't want to say sick, that's actually mischaracterizing it, but in a strange way, there's a certain level of that the people we were talking about in this conversation are also artists, right? So, you could assign a strange level of a twisted empathy to what they're going through. Maybe someone who felt compelled to take responsibility for their behavior and go through the prison sentence and pay back society. Part of that was because he knew what he did was wrong. And I think there's something a little more telling than someone who's going to at least face the fire as opposed to run away and try to just keep doing the same thing and hope that people don't know about it as much. But yeah, I think for us to be able to see the greater scheme of why these conversations are happening, and I think there are people who still will argue the value of things like podcasting and blogging, and I say that's where you're finding conversations like this. And these are the people, we are the people, right? We're the people of the country. We're the people walking around who aren't trying to filter it for any kind of weird, twisted political agenda, or not yet for money. I'm sure we'd all love to be making enough money that comes into play doing this. But I think there's a certain level of we want to keep showing the value of alternative journalism like this, and we owe it to even maybe get uncomfortable and have to be having a conversation about things that we find hard to talk about. So it's cool, man. I'm glad to do it. I'm happy to have been a part of this.
Well, definitely. Well, guys, I want to thank you so much for being on. Again, thank you to Dave Maresca of the Hollow 9 Network for coming on. Argalin Darkscares, of course, fellow writer over at Morbidly Beautiful. Gentlemen, I will both have you back on again, and we will find another great topic to discuss.
Absolutely, man. Come hang over at the Hollow 9 Network, you guys.
You know it.
Cool.
And once again, I want to say thank you to Dave Maresca from the Hollow 9 Network for being on. And, of course, a fellow Morbidly Beautiful writer, Argalin Darkscares. Coming up in just a few moments, we're going to go into our final Digital Dismember Spotlight for the evening. But before that, we're going to go into our final Metal Massacre Spotlight. And in our final Spotlight, the name of the band is Gore Rotted, the CD is A New Dawn for the Dead, and the song is Everything Went Black. CD was A New Dawn for the Dead, and the song was And Everything Went Black. Gore Rotted was a death grindcore band from Britain that was formed in 1998. They were signed to Metal Blade Records. They are currently no longer together, but you can visit them at www.metalblade.com/us/artists/Gore-Rotted to pick up their CDs and merchandise. But now it's time, ladies and gentlemen, for our final digital dismemberment. And in our final digital dismemberment spotlight this evening, we are covering Scream Factory's Blu-ray release of The Devil's Candy. Now, a little bit of info on this film. The Devil's Candy was directed by Sean Byrne. It stars Ethan Embry, Shuri Appleby, Pruitt Taylor Vince, Kiara Glasgow, Tony Amendola, Leelander Orser, Craig Nye, Orion Landa, Richard Rollin, Sheila Bailey Lucas, Marco Perella, Melinda Royer, Ash Thapalisle, Jamie Tisdale, and Jose Villarreal. Now, to give you the actual idea behind the story, metal music, wet paint, and family are the passions of Jesse, a struggling painter who lives a happy life with his wife, Astrid, and their preteen daughter, Zoe. And things look even brighter when Jesse and Astrid are able to put in a bid on their dream home, a huge property in rural Texas with a barn big enough for a proper art studio, after the price is driven down due to the home's mysterious past. After the trio moves in, Jesse's work starts taking on a new, considerably darker flavor, and things get even more ominous when Ray, the hulking, clearly unbalanced son of the deceased former owners, appears on the doorstep one night, clutching a red electric guitar and asking to return home. It soon becomes clear that Ray and Jesse are both being influenced by the same satanic forces, and that Jesse's family won't be safe until they find a way to quiet the devil himself. Now, before we even get into the movie a little bit more, if you're forewarned, there will be spoiler alerts in this review. I really enjoyed this movie from a lot of elements. Not only was it, dark, scary, you had the satanic references. There's great use of metal music involved in this film. The soundtrack is something that really jumped out to me, and the fact that Metallica actually gave the rights to one of their songs for the film makes it stand out even more, considering over the years how Metallica has been with allowing their music to be used in certain projects. The film itself is quite visually stunning. I thought it was very well shot. It's well paced. The film has brightness in all the right spots. It certainly brings in elements of darkness in others. The artwork outside of the film is actually very stunning. In fact, one of the special features on the disc is a portfolio of different artwork that was used for the film. In particular, the print that the main character paints, Jesse, starts off as butterflies, but eventually turns into this whole demonic butterflies with children's heads and burning flames, which eventually incorporates his young daughter into the picture as well. Now, the use of music, in particular heavy metal in this, really strikes me as interesting because the lead bad guy, if you want to call him the bad guy in this, in the beginning is shown using a guitar to basically drown out the evil voices that he's hearing in his head. And in fact, several times makes the statements, "They won't let me play it loud." And at one point in the movie, when he shows up at the house, he brings the guitar and amp and tries to give them to Zoe, the young daughter. Now, as the movie goes on, the father starts to hear the same evil voices that our bad guy hears. And you can kind of see a progression, not almost so much of evil. You don't get the real impression that the father's committing any evil. It's almost more like he's a conduit to the voices, and what he's painting is basically what the voices are telling him. It's almost like, in a sense, he's linked to the killer and is visually painting the picture of what's been going on. And as you go through the film, you see that this guy has killed other children in the past based on what the voices are telling him. And I found it to be another interesting side point that when he's in his hotel room, he's watching religious programming that, speaks about the evils of mankind and the devil all throughout. Now, the family dynamic I found to be very interesting. A lot of times in these types of films, you kind of get what would be, quote-unquote, the wholesome family with the white picket fence and, dad works a professional job and mom's, Miss Homemaker and the children are little angels and everything like that. And I feel it was nice to see the dynamic of a family who's a little bit more into the darker things. Not necessarily Satan or anything like that, but the father's artwork being darker. The joy of seeing the father and the daughter enjoying the heavy metal music together. Seeing the young girl playing the guitar in the amp when she eventually gets it, when her father accidentally forgets to pick her up from school. And part of the deal is she gets to keep the guitar as dad's penance for doing this. Now, this isn't an overtly, horrifically bloody, gory film. Now, there are parts that are pretty intense, and I think that comes across very nicely. Again, you don't always have to show copious amounts of blood and gore to get the point across that a movie is frightening and scary. I thought that the house was absolutely fantastic. As I've said before in previous reviews, a location can be just as much a character as an actor can be. And I don't know if it's just the angles that they shot the house from. Maybe it was the age of the house. I'm not sure, but you feel like the house is a character all on its own. It's got its own presence, especially at the end as we get towards the climax of the film, and there's a fire that breaks out. That it almost changes the tone completely. Now, for me, I was very satisfied with how the movie played out, how the characters were drawn out, how it ended. Now, I'm not going to give away the ending for you. You're going to have to see that on your own. But overall, I find the movie to be an enjoyable experience. I would give it 3.5 to 3.75 stars out of 5. Scream Factory did a really good job with this disc. Again, it comes with a short film. There's a music video on here, and of course I mentioned the artwork having its own little segment on the disc. So overall, I would give the Blu-ray a rating of 7 out of 10. If I wanted to be real nitpicky again, the only thing I feel like was missing was maybe an interview with the director, maybe some of the cast. I really would have liked to have heard something from the father and the daughter, and how well they connected with the metal. If they're both metal fans in real life, because it's kind of hard to fake liking metal, and when you're watching the film, you really get the impression that the father and the daughter are really into that, possibly even so in real life. So again, like I said, the family dynamic of it to me was very entertaining. So I would recommend that you head on over to screamfactory.com to pick up your copy of The Devil's Candy. Well, once again, I think we've had an absolutely fantastic show. I want to say thank you to my guests, Dave Maresca of Hollow 9 Network, and of course Argalin Darkscares, a fellow writer over at morbidlybeautiful.com. Again, I think we really nailed the essence of what we were looking for in our interview, talking about Victor Salva and the things that he did and whether or not he should still have a career. As I've said before, is a very polarizing subject, but it was nice to actually have a conversation that wasn't a screaming match and was actually intelligent. I want to say thank you to Scream Factory for sending over our Blu-ray copy of The Curse and, of course, The Devil's Candy. And I want to say thank you to all the bands that we featured in our Metal Massacre Spotlights this evening. Those plans included Guttural Corpora Cavernosa, Body Snatch, and Gore Rotted. And until next week, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Dead Man from MorbidlyBeautiful.com, Coughing Cuties Magazine, and Digital Dead Magazine, telling you all to rest in peace.